2 years ago, I dropped this video about Zenless Zone Zero's combat from the very first closed beta test. And as of the day that I'm dropping this video that you're watching right now, we have exactly 1 week until Hoyoverse releases Zenless Zone Zero globally. As an action combat game, it's no surprise that Hoyo did make a ton of changes from the first beta 2 years ago all the way till now. During this stretch, I've participated in all 3 beta tests over the past 2 years and fully cleared every combat mode available during those tests. So today we'll be reviewing and summarizing my closed beta test 1 video and then highlighting some of the biggest changes to the Zenless Zone Zero combat system that you can expect to see on the release version. Without further ado, let's roll the footage.
Zenless Zone Zero has 3 different types of standard attacks that are universal to all characters: basic attacks, dash attacks, and dodge attacks. Unlike similar games such as Honkai Impact or Punishing Grey Raven, there is no definitive time fracture mechanic yet, but again, the name dodge attack lends itself to be pretty self-explanatory. Last but not least, we have sub-attacks. Sub-attacks are extensions or modifications to a character's basic attack string. Of the characters that have them, specific criteria and/or inputs are generally required to perform these sub-attacks. Our next topic to cover is special attacks. Special attacks are really just the equivalent of elemental skills in Genshin. If your special attack icon is colorful, that means your EX special attack is ready. Getting access to your EX special attack has to do with the Ether Energy system. Ether Energy is generated by basic attacking enemies, killing enemies for Ether Energy, or breaking destructibles around the instance area. Not only is the EX special attack a lot more powerful than a regular special attack, but it also can enhance agents' combos or even change the way an agent is played. Zenless Zone Zero has a mechanic called Stagger. Every enemy has an extra bar under their health bar that tracks their stagger status. Once that bar is filled up completely, your character will stun the enemy and you're free to DPS the enemy down for a short period of time while they take increased damage. And if you want more DPS after staggering the enemy, that takes us into the QTE system. ZZZ doesn't actually call these attacks QTEs aside from the icon in the character stats page, and instead they call them combo attacks. Regardless of what you want to call them, combo attacks are triggered by landing a heavy attack on a staggered enemy. A character's ultimate has 0 relation to the Ether Energy system that I talked about earlier. You're probably asking, well, how do I even charge up my ultimate then? The answer to that is the decibel rating system. Rating is split into 3 stages named Uproar, Blasting, and Maximum in ascending order. You'll naturally build up your decibel rating by just hitting enemies, but 2 ways to accelerate the rate at which you increase your decibel rating are performing combo attacks and dodge attacks. Once you reach the maximum stage of decibel rating, you're able to cast 1 ultimate between one of your 3 party members, so choose wisely.
And I'd say that's a pretty good 1-minute edit of my old video covering all the basics that are still relevant to this day. But with that knowledge under your belt, let's dive into the new changes and the new parts of the combat. Perfect Assists completely turns Zenless Zone Zero's combat system upside down. When an enemy has a golden glow right before they release an attack, a perfect assist can be triggered by pressing the swap button. Depending on whether the character is melee or ranged, they'll swap in to either parry the incoming attack or swiftly dodge the incoming attack while dealing quick damage in the process. These are called defensive assists and evasive assists respectively, and both are under the umbrella term of perfect assists. Defensive assists deal minimal damage but build up a lot of days on the enemy, which is the bar that accumulates under the enemy health bar and staggers the enemy when full. Evasive assists deal slightly more damage but don't nearly build up as much days in comparison. Beforehand, the game was very dodge heavy with a lot of dash attack and dodge attack utilization. Now the game is very parry centric thanks to this mechanic. The only 2 things stopping you from abusing this mechanic all the time is the fact that not every single enemy attack is parryable, and perfect assists do consume a resource signified by the yellow swap button at the very bottom right of your screen. You can hold up to a maximum of 6 assist points at once, and each perfect assist that you trigger costs 1 of these points. Using an ultimate will recover 3 assist points, and a chain attack will also recover 1 assist point. If you're constantly parrying at any moment that you can, bosses usually eat up your assist points extremely quickly with attack chains that consume up to 3 or 4 assist points at once. But don't worry if the incoming attack indicator is red instead of gold because you're out of assist points. Timing your swap correctly will still give you a perfect dodge, so you can choose to dodge normally or dodge via a perfectly timed swap to still have the option to cycle characters without taking damage in the process. The next mechanic on the list is attribute anomalies. Each character in Zenless Zone Zero has an element between physical, fire, lightning, ice, and ether. In closed beta test 1, aside from the character's element dictating what elemental damage bonus that they'd build on their gear, elements really didn't matter all that much. They had vague mentions of elemental effects such as burn, freeze, or shock, but CBT lacked any sort of tooltip for these mechanics and they didn't feel impactful at all. Luckily, Hoyo caught on to this, and in the following betas they introduced the attribute anomaly system, which revamped the benefits of each element in combat to actually have meaningful impact on your gameplay but still be simplistic in practice. As you deal physical fire, lightning, ice, or ether damage, effects such as assault, burn, shock, freeze, and corruption will eventually afflict the enemy after withstanding enough damage from one specific element. Within these 5 different attribute anomalies, 3 of them are simple damage over time effects and 2 of them have special debuffs. Burn is a classic damage over time, while shock and corruption only deal extra damage to enemies when you actually land hits on the enemies affected by shock or corruption. All 3 of these attribute anomaly damage ticks can also interrupt enemy movements and attacks if played against certain enemy types. The easiest one to understand from a logical standpoint is afflicting shock versus machine enemies, since like in real life all of our phones, appliances, and other machines operate at specific voltages and too much electricity can damage them. For the other 2, corruption is good against ethereal enemies, which are usually the black and green glowy dudes, and burn is good against organic enemies like humanoids. As for ice's freeze and physical's assault, these are the 2 most powerful attribute anomalies. Building up enough ice damage will eventually freeze an enemy in place, allowing you to unleash DPS for a short time without having to dodge. However, once you hit an enemy enough or enough time passes, the enemy will thaw out and take shatter damage as well. Once an enemy is shattered, they retain a thin coat of ice on their model, which signifies that they are afflicted with the frostbite debuff, which makes an enemy take increased crit damage from your attacks. Building up enough physical damage will eventually trigger Assault, which is a one-time damage instance of physical damage. After an enemy suffers assault damage, they flinch to interrupt their movement, and they also take increased stays, which makes it slightly easier for you to stagger the enemy. But you might be thinking, well, wouldn't that just make mono element teams the way to go, since you can constantly apply the same element to maximize these attribute anomalies? And yes, mono element teams like Mono Ice with Ellen, Sokaku, and Lycaon exist upon release, but thanks to a mechanic called attribute disorders, you can also build a team with 2 different elements. Let's say you have one attribute anomaly on the enemy currently, and you build up another attribute anomaly from a different element while the former one still exists. When this happens, the first anomaly effect will be overridden by the most recent one you apply and additionally inflict what is known as an attribute disorder. Similar to how Assault works, attribute disorder is just one instance of damage, but this time it's a pretty massive one and it can even interrupt the attacks of some of the biggest boss enemies in the game. Both attribute disorder and the various attribute anomaly effects have their damage tied to a stat called anomaly proficiency. Anomaly proficiency is not to be confused with anomaly mastery, since these are 2 entirely different stats. Although a little confusing, you want to internalize the fact that in Zenless, anomaly proficiency equates to more damage from your attribute effects, while anomaly mastery equates to a faster buildup rate of anomalies on enemies. The anomaly proficiency stat is most commonly found as a substat on your gear, while the anomaly mastery stat is most commonly built as a main stat in your 6th gear slot as a percentage stat, despite the main page showing a flat number. Furthermore, what the game doesn't tell you is that attribute disorders also calculate damage based on how much contribution an agent makes towards the anomaly buildup, and also how much time remaining the overridden effect had left. Basically, in simple man's terms, you'll get a ton more damage out of attribute disorder the faster you can apply your second attribute anomaly, and having your agent with a ton of anomaly proficiency in their build and kit doing most of the attribute application. Even for someone who's played as much ZZZ pre-release as possible, that's all I can say about attribute disorders until we figure out some more nuances on release. But the most important thing I want you to take away from this section is that yes, certain mono-element teams are very strong, but you can also build multi-element teams that focus on triggering as many attribute disorders as possible. In fact, there's even a class of characters called anomaly type characters that usually have their kit centered around building up their respective element's attribute anomaly as fast as possible to get that attribute disorder. The last thing I want to touch upon is additional abilities. Using characters from the same faction or element in your team together unlocks an additional ability which you can view in the top right of the character select screen. These are most often non-negligible personal buffs to characters that you want to 100% consider when building a team. If you're curious on what element each character is, here's a nice infographic on Instagram that I found from @zenless.post. And here is an infographic from the same person, but this time for factions. Usually, building a team that synergizes with each other's kits will naturally allow you to activate at least 2, if not all 3 team members' additional abilities. The easiest way to understand this concept is to look at an example team, so let's look at the ideal mono ice team, which consists of Ellen, Sokaku, and Lycaon. Ellen and Sokaku are the core of this team, since Ellen is an ice DPS while Sokaku is a specialized ice support, providing a valuable ice res down debuff and some attack percent buffs via her talents and her 4-star weapon passive. Even though the two do not share a faction, they are both ice characters and will activate each other's additional ability. Lycaon just happens to be the perfect third character, since not only is he a stun type character that helps the team with building days, but he is also both an ice type and from the Victoria housekeeping faction like Ellen, so his additional ability will also be activated for the maximum team potential. But for those like me, I didn't actually end up pulling Lycaon in closed beta test 3 at least, so I had to settle for someone like Ambi, who is our free stun type character. In this case, Ambi is neither an ice type nor from Sokaku's faction Section 6 or from Ellen's faction Victoria Housekeeping. Therefore, Ambi will not gain her additional ability, but your main units of Ellen and Sokaku will, so overall the team maintains most of its power since Ambi is just there to build up days for the team. Hopefully this shows you that unless a character's additional ability is absolutely crucial to their kit, it's okay to only have 2 out of 3 additional abilities activated as long as your team makes sense and each character fulfills a role. With that, hopefully you guys enjoyed this updated guide for Zenless Zone Zero's combat, and most importantly, I hope this guide was helpful for those looking to play the game on release. Let me know if you guys want more Zenless Zone Zero content on the main channel or on the second channel. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.